Hi guys, my name is Rochelle and I'm a Ravenclaw, and today I'm here to share with you the results for this round of the hashtag Get Graphic Readathon. I am making this separate video because I read a lot of things during this round of hashtag Get Graphic. For those of you that don't know, Get Graphic is a readathon that was originally created by Kristen from What's Cappening and Kayla from Bookadoodles. I will leave links to their channels down below. And this year they also had two co-hosts with them, Adriana from Perpetual Pages and Sam from Thoughts on Tomes. Again, I will leave links to their channel down below. So Get Graphic is a 2 to 3 day readathon entirely dedicated to reading your graphic novels and comics and manga that you have accumulated but just haven't gotten around to yet. This round of Get Graphic went from 5 PM on Friday to 11:59 PM on Sunday. This is a super late wrap up. It was the first weekend of October that this occurred. I'm sorry, but I've been avoiding filming this because I have to talk about a lot of stuff. So for Get Graphic, I consume graphic novels at a ridiculous pace. I read them very, very quickly. I probably don't take enough time to sit there and appreciate the art, but that's neither here nor there. And for the weekend of Get Graphic, it was also the weekend after my birthday, so I did have some family stuff and celebration things going on, so I didn't read as much as I could have. But somehow, even with all of that going on, during this readathon, I managed to finish 27 different things. Yes, you did hear that correctly, 27. So for this wrap up, I'm going to introduce something called Lightning Round. I will list the title of the work and the author, I will give you the star rating, and then I will give you a pro and a con for each of these things. If I have more to say about the work, I may go into it, but I'm not going to talk a huge amount about what each story contains. So if any of these sound interesting to you, I highly recommend that you go on Goodreads. So with all of that, we'd better get started. And I also haven't done a final page total for this yet, so I have no idea how many pages I read. So the first thing that I read was Paper Girls Issue 1 by Brian K. Vaughan. I gave this 3 stars. Pro, I thought the concept was interesting. I liked the art style enough. Con, I was not in love with the direction that the story was taken. This story didn't really grip me as much as Brian K. Vaughan's other works have, such as Saga. I'm sorry that you guys can now hear lawn tools, but we're just gonna have to roll with it. The next thing that I read was Pluto No Issue 1 by Jeff Lemire. I also gave this 3 stars. I really liked the art. I thought it could have been a little better, and I did really like the story. I was very interested in the final climax and where that would take us. Con, I found the color palette to be quite dull. It didn't capture my attention at all in that regard, and this one did take quite a bit to get going. We got to a good place at the very end, but I'm not sure that it's enough for me to continue reading this series. The next thing that I read was Prophet, Volume 1 by Brandon Graham. I gave this 2 stars. I have not had great luck with Brandon Graham's work, and when I picked this up, I also didn't know that it was technically a continuation of a story that had been abandoned for several years, and that to really get the most out of it, you should be reading those before you got to this. This is billed as a great jumping on point, but it's not. The pro for this was, I think if I had read and enjoyed the previous works, this would have been really, really good. But the con is, I didn't have that background knowledge. I didn't know what was going on. There was so much gratuitous violence and gore that didn't seem to serve any purpose. I didn't like the art, and I just don't think I'm going to like anything Brandon Graham makes. The next thing that I managed to finish was Revival Volume 1 by Tim Seeley. I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed the plotline for this. The plotline for this is what would happen if suddenly in a small town in America people didn't stay dead. I really was enjoying this. Like, I really enjoyed the story. I was really enjoying the art. So that's all a pro. My con for this is the reason that this didn't get 5 stars for me. There was a moment in this where I would say the main character reacted in a manner that was very over the top for the situation, and there was some slut shaming that really wasn't addressed, and so yeah, I can't condone this with 5 stars. The next thing that I finished was Roche Limit Volume 1 by Michael Morsey. I gave this 3 stars. This had the potential to be very interesting. Like, the concept is, what would happen if a billionaire funded and created a Las Vegas style city a galaxy away? So yeah, the pro was it was a really great concept. The con was the particular story that we followed in this was not great. It also has like the author's interpretation of zombies, and I honestly dislike zombies. Like, I don't like them. That is something that's very personal to me. I often have nightmares about zombies. I don't need to see them in any more things. I don't need them in my brain, and I didn't know that when going into this, so that was a huge con for me. The next thing that I read was Rockstars issue 1 by Joe Harris. I also gave this 2 stars. The pro for this again was the concept. It's about 2 kids that team up and try and solve the mysterious disappearances and deaths following this one particular rock band. My con is, again, I didn't like the particular story that this was following, or the way that the writer chose to start the narrative off with. It felt very disconnected from the story that we then jumped into, and I'm sure that that would play a much bigger role later on. But for someone trying out this like graphic novel to see if they want to pick it up, it was not a good fit for me. And yeah, I also wasn't a huge fan of the art. It was, for art, I tend to like very clearly defined shapes, unless you're being complete watercolor. This seemed to be trying to mix those, and it just didn't work very well for me. The next thing that I read during Get Graphic was Romulus issue 1 by Brian Hill. I ended up giving this 5 stars. So, the pro for this is the concept, the execution, everything. This story follows a young woman who is the last surviving member of her family. Her family just happens to be a guild of female assassins that stretches back to the ancient Roman times, and her family has been decimated by a government agency that had previously employed them, and this young woman in that, her and her mother were the last 2 surviving members, and she watched her mother sacrifice herself so that she could move forward and take revenge on this government agency. The con was that this story ended. Like, I got to the end of this and just like, because I read my comics digitally, I often pick up things with Humble Bundle, which I'll also leave a link to down below. Like, I got to the bottom of the PDF that I was reading and continued to scroll because I was very upset that I couldn't keep going with this story. So I highly recommend that you check that out if you are at all interested. The next thing that I read was Rumble Volume 1 by John Arcudi. I ended up giving this 3 stars. So the pro of this was, it was a very unique and different story, something I had never seen done before. However, my con for this was that it did become quite confusing quite rapidly. Like, there was a lot of details, there was a lot of information dumping in this first volume. At certain points it was definitely like an issue trying to keep my head above the water of all this like information that it was dropping on you. The next thing that I picked up was 7 to Eternity Issue 1 by Rick Remender. I ended up giving this 3 stars. Again, the pro is the story. This is based in a fantasy realm where a single family or like small group of people have refused to join with someone trying to unite all the nations. If you didn't unite with this person, then you were deemed a threat to the peace and killed. So this follows the last group of people still alive and still refusing to join, and it is the son of the leader being sent forward to hear what this emperor has to say. The con about this was a lack of information to the reader. Like, what I just told you is basically the entire story that we got. We didn't learn really anything about the emperor except his name, the Mud King, and that he's going to kill everyone that doesn't join with him. We didn't really learn much about the family that we were following. We didn't really learn much about the actual world. So this was cool, and I might pick up future issues, but it's not one I'm going to be super keen to get to. The next thing that I read was Sex Criminals Volume 1 by Matt Fraction. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Again, the pro for this, I really enjoyed the story, I really enjoyed the art. I'm sure most of you have heard about what this is about, but a quick overview is that this is a story about 2 people who figure out that when they orgasm, time stops, and so they decide that they're going to use that time to rob a bank to save a library, which I am all for. The con for this was I found a character's leap of intuition to be very unrealistic, and then the reaction that followed that leap of intuition to also be very unrealistic, but it was made necessary to bring in another group of characters into this story. So yeah, I just wish that that had been a little more fleshed out and maybe held off a little longer. The next thing that I read was She-Wolf Issue 1 by Rich Tamaso. I ended up giving this 1 star. The pro is this was 1 issue and therefore it was very short. The con is literally everything else. The art was not good. The art was not for me. I'm sure lots of people really like that style of art, but I did not think that the art worked at all with the story that the writer was trying to tell. And then there's also the fact that the story was awful. Like, so bad. Oh good lord. Yeah, I'm not gonna say any more about this because I just don't even want to think about it. The next thing that I read was Shutter Volume 1 by Joe Keating, which I gave 4 stars. I originally read Shutter Issue 1 in the hashtag Comic Book Sunday ReadAthon. I really enjoyed that, so I picked up the first volume to see if I continued to enjoy it. Pro, I absolutely did. This story follows a young woman whose family is known as this world's like great adventurers and explorers, and she goes into the family business. She's a photographer, and she's a photographer and a writer, and she captures all of the adventures that she goes on and then releases them into the public. We find at the beginning of this story that she has stopped doing that because at some point her father, her mentor, has died during one of these adventures. And the story just takes off from there. I really loved this. My only con for this is I think that this was a little too fast-paced. We needed to slow down a little bit more and get more time with other characters, because we did learn a lot about some other characters that I just didn't care about, and I didn't value their story compared to the other side characters I could have been learning more about. The next thing that I read was Snot Girl issue 1 by Brian Lee O'Malley. I gave this 3 stars. The pro was I did really like the art. The con was, while I again liked the concept of the story, I did not like the execution. I found the main character to be very vapid and shallow and dislikable, in that she only valued other people for what they could do for her and her image, and I'm just not about that. I don't want to waste my time reading this kind of story, which I could experience in real life, over something else. The next thing that I read was Sons of the Devil issue 1 by, I'm gonna get this wrong, Brian Buxaletto. I ended up giving this 2 stars. The pro was again the concept. The cons were the execution, and I found some of the things in this to be problematic, and I can't talk about it too much because it's a spoiler, but yeah, I found certain tropes in this to be very problematic, and I did not enjoy seeing them, and again, I wasn't a huge fan of the art for this. The next thing that I finished was Southern Bastards Volume 1 by Jason Aaron. I ended up also giving this 2 stars. Again, the pro was the concept. This was about a man that went back to his small southern town to clean out his father's old house after his uncle, who was looking after the place, is placed in a nursing home, returning to a society that he hasn't been to in, I would say, 40 years at this point, I think. And so he's got to reevaluate how much like his father he has become in his old age. So the con for this was, again, art. It was not great. The color palette wasn't fantastic. My biggest con for this, though, was it saw very much the answer to every problem being violence. There is a group of people like are being bullied and suppressed, and the main character's first immediate instinct isn't to deal with this in a non-violent way, but to immediately beat someone across the face with a fry basket that's just come out of the fryer. So yeah, violence was the answer to every problem raised, and again, I also found this quite problematic. The only black person that we saw in a position of power, he was a police officer, was portrayed as corrupt, and I found that to be really frustrating. The next thing that I read was Spawn Origins Volume 1 by Todd McFarlane. I also gave this 1 star. The pro of this was, again, the concept. The cons were the execution. This is one that I very seriously considered DNFing. I got to about halfway and had to take a break. Like, I literally had to go and read, I think, 3 or 4 other things and then come back to this and force my way through the last bit. Again, I found this to be very problematic in its portrayal of people of color. This was originally written in the 1990s, and like, if you really love the character of Spawn, I can imagine why that you would enjoy this. But yeah, just the representation in this was not great. I did like the art, but the story wasn't there. The representation was an issue. And also there was some very toxic masculinity also portrayed in this. Like, one scene is referencing the fact that this main character couldn't get his wife pregnant, and therefore he views himself as less of a man because he couldn't give his wife a child. I don't agree with that, and I'm not okay with it. And I'm not okay with it being portrayed as such and then not addressed. The next thing that I read was Spread Volume 1 by Justin Jordan. I gave this 3 stars. Pro was the story. I really liked the concept and the art. My con for this was, again, stuff not being challenged. So there were 2 particular instances in this where I thought the issue being represented needed to be challenged. One of them involves a character that joins the group that is the main focus of this, who we have previously recognized as someone who cannibalizes and sells meat to other travelers of people he deems are troublemakers. Like, he kills and then cooks people he deems as troublemakers. And the group discovers this, and then the other character tries to deal with the group. And then, like, 40 pages later, he's a trusted companion. Like, I don't understand that. And my second issue was another character who is represented in such a way as to be flawless in this time of much flaw. There is a lot of flaw going on here. His attitude, etc., like, it's a spoiler, so I can't really talk too much about it, but yeah, I was not a fan of this guy and the way that he chose to manipulate people. Also, my other issue was this was very bloody and gory in a way that I found to be over the top, and a lot of people like think that that's fun and that's fine, but it's just not something that I like. The next thing that I read was The Strange Talent of Luther Strode, Volume 1, also by Justin Jordan. I gave this 4 stars. The pro was I thought that this was a very interesting take on superheroes and what that could actually lead to, rather than the traditional like Marvel or DC route that we have seen. I know I'm wearing a Superman shirt, but I actually tend to prefer Marvel. This is just a shirt that I happen to have and felt more relevant to this video than a plain one. My con with this was it resolved too rapidly, and I know that this is like meant to be a set of contained stories in each volume, but it meant that a lot of the climax didn't hit with the punch that it could have. And again, being taught from traditional superhero stuff, like I'm just like, well, if that person has died, then they'll probably come back very soon. So yeah, the punch was not quite there where it needed to be. The next thing that I read was Surgeon X, issue 1 by Sarah Kenny. I gave this 2 stars. The pro was I really liked the social commentary that this was making. This is about what the author imagines will happen when viruses and bacteria, etc., become resistant enough to antibiotics that we have to start rationing them. My cons for this were I didn't feel like the characters or the world was as developed as they could have been. They came off as not 2-dimensional but not quite 3-dimensional. It was like the author had taken a list of attributes and that was it. Also, the art wasn't great with this. Again, it was very dull. It became quite difficult to discern depth in this and differentiate objects from just background. I'm sure people that are interested in medicine and the breakdown of society would love this, but it just didn't tickle me. The next thing that I read was Throwaways, issue 1 by Caitlin Kittredge. I gave this 3 stars. I was really enjoying the concept and the story. My main con with this was the art didn't quite fit, and there was again some potentially problematic representation that I really took issue with. I don't really want to talk too much about this because I think this is one of those things that you're better off going into blind. Also, I felt like things needed to have developed a little bit more before I would believe some of the situations that were presented in this. The next things that I read were Bee and Puppycat Volume 1 and 2. Both of these are obviously by the same writer, so Natasha Allegria. I gave both of these 2 stars. My pro for this was the art, and I thought that this was really cute. My con for this is this seems just like excerpts and short stories for a much bigger world and role, and I believe that Bee and Puppycat is from an animated show or something. But yeah, I went into this without that background, so I was very, very lost for the vast majority of the stuff going on here. I think if you're a fan of the show, you will really appreciate these, but they didn't do anything for me. The last things that I read were Bravest Warriors, Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, and Volume 4. All of these are obviously by the same writer, by Joey Camus. I'm pretty sure I've said that last name wrong. I'm very sorry. I gave all of these 3 stars. Again, this was similar to Bee and Puppycat in that I felt like you really needed to have the background to this. Like, I would imagine that you already have watched like the show or whatever other comic or something that they were in to really like understand who these people are and why they work together as the group dynamic that they have and how they met, etc. But unlike Bee and Puppycat, this was a more cohesive storyline. Like, all of these stories clearly followed the previous events that we had just read. I really, really enjoyed the art for this. I thought it was super fun. Alright guys, so that was all 27 things that I managed to read for #GetGraphic. I did not manage to complete all the challenges, surprisingly. I managed all but one, and the one for that was to read a work in black and white. I had hoped to read at least 1 volume of Fairy Tale, which I also have, but I could feel myself getting burnt out, and I really just wanted to get as much of this other stuff finished as possible because I'd had it for quite a long time and not been giving it the attention it deserved. I think I had a pretty okay time with what I read. There are definitely several things that I will look into getting more volumes or issues of. If you have read any of these previously, I would love to hear what you thought about them down in the comments below. I would love to chat with you further about my thoughts if you were particularly interested in anything in more detail. Please let me know and I will do my best to give you a more in-depth thought. So that is everything that I have to talk about today. I hope you guys are having a magical day. Bye!